I'd like to welcome on stage my panelists for this morning. Vivian from Yogi, Malay from Locus, and Brett from SSI Schaefer. If you could please join me on the stage. So I'm sure many of you have been on panels yourselves, many of you in this room. And normally what happens is the panelists get together with the moderator and they come up with a list of questions and a format. But if you've been on a panel with me, you'll probably notice that I don't send you much pre-notice and I don't send you a script. I see some people nodding their heads. I heard a laugh as well. So even likewise this morning, Brett can tell you, he and I have not spoken about what we're going to be talking about for the next 45 minutes, have we? Yeah? You have the synopsis, and you have the title, but that's about it. All right? So we've got a good panel set together this morning, and I think we'll have some interesting perspectives. So to kick us off, Brett, maybe you can tell us a bit about yourself, Schaefer, and also why the interest of talking about innovation in e-commerce logistics from your perspective.
Thank you. Yes, so my name's Brett Fury. I'm from SSI Schaefer. I'm the Managing Director in Australia. Thank you for having me here today and thank you for the opportunity to speak. So what's the importance of innovation in the supply chain, especially in the e-commerce realm? I think it's vitally important because e-commerce is a very different, challenging proposition to when it comes to, I suppose, distributing orders to stores. So we must have different innovation. It requires a different skill set. It requires a very different set of rules and understanding, and it comes with different customer requirements. So that's why I think innovation in the supply chain for e-commerce is vitally important.
Thank you very much, Brett. Vivian, a bit about yourself.
Thank you. My name is Vivian. I'm the Regional Sales Manager at Yogi. Just to break down the question, right, innovation in e-commerce logistics. I think when e-commerce came about, a lot of 3PLs struggled to do the work, right? I think few years down the road, I think we're a lot better. Even 3PLs are better at the fulfillment of it, the last mile delivery of it, the consolidation for international freight. So what Yogi does is we focus on the road freight side. So I'll just let Brad handle all the fulfillment side, obviously. Yogi does the road freight side, particularly first mile, last mile. But more than Courier Express Parcel, we actually do all sorts of road freight outside of Courier Express Parcel. Yep.
Right, thank you, Vivian. And Malay, your opening observations, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dr. Krishnan. So my name is Malay Shah. I head the P&L for East business for Locus, which is everything from Middle East to Southeast Asia to Far East, including India as a market. The important part, there are two important parts in the topic today. One is innovation, and the second one is innovation specifically in e-commerce logistics. If I were to just look at a big picture, the big picture clearly is that consumers, all of us in the room over here, have experienced e-commerce, are getting integrated into the supply chains of organizations, right? So, until now, if you really look at all the traditional supply chains, they lasted with all the way up to distributors or retailers, but now we are being part of the supply chains of the organizations. And most organizations today have not necessarily figured a really good way of running those processes and systems, in terms of interacting with the most complex part of the supply chain, as well as, both from a scale perspective as well as complexity from a process perspective, and that's where innovation can really come in terms of solving the problems in the most complex part of the supply chain, which is usually the last mile. And I would like to add one additional point is that we need to approach this from two perspectives. E-commerce is not something what only Amazon or Lazada or those organizations do, but even the traditional organizations are really integrating the retailers and their consumers as part of the supply chain. So even they are approaching this from an e-commerce standpoint. So we can hopefully share perspectives, from those dimensions as well.
No, excellent point, yeah. Because when we think of e-commerce, we think of the Lazadas, the Shopees of this world, but there are also a lot of more traditional brick and mortar white goods companies who are also trying to enter that space, yeah. Speaking from my personal experience, the company I work for is a $5 billion company, but we don't sell online. So, and we are trying to go into the e-commerce space, and it's one of the most popular products in the world these last 2 years, PCR kits and ART tests. But that mindset of traditional manufacturing, distribution, supply business versus that of an e-commerce company is very different. So, but thinking about it, innovations in e-commerce logistics, what's the latest and the greatest? Many of the things that we see, we've talked about at previous LogiSYMs, right? Hasn't been fully bedded in. What's the latest that we're seeing? I'll start with you, Malik.
So, I think what's really latest is the consumer needs keep growing, and especially what has happened, especially during the last 2 years, during the pandemic, is that you practically, even as a consumer, and I keep telling this to my 15-year-old son, that he doesn't even have to get out of the bed to get anything, right? And that's the generation, which is basically spoiled with choices. And what I mean by that is, if you really look at countries like India, for example, where pharmacy delivery is happening out of home, and it was a very unique concept for the ones who have lived in kind of a prescription-led world in the West, especially in the countries like US, that how can you deliver medicines at home? But it didn't stop there, right? Now you have salon services at home, you have spa services at home. My car gets maintained at home. Even the car wash, even the guy comes with the water to even do the car wash at home, right? So practically, the consumer expectations have gone through the roof, and the technology has clearly helped in meeting a lot of those consumer expectations. Everything practically being delivered at home, and what is happening as a result of which is, while the consumer is spoiled for choices, on the back end, the organizations have to do a huge amount of work to make things happen. So, for example, for like pharmacy delivery in India, you see deliveries happening, in 30 minutes, in 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hour, and 5 hour slots. And obviously, we are not just talking about same day delivery and next day delivery anymore. We are talking about delivery at a pace, and you are able to drive a very large premium associated with that as well. So it's no longer just a cost play, but if you are doing a 30-minute versus a 5-hour delivery, you see a large premium being charged. But you have to make that happen through a massive orchestration in terms of across dispatches from your hubs. You need to have rapid delivery technology being available. You need to enable last mile connectivity with the riders, with the transport vehicles, ensure there's a seamless communications with the customer. So all those pieces have to really come together. In some sense, we have to put together an ERP or an execution system, which really didn't exist until now, right? Because the supply chains practically entered at the distribution point. So that's a very large part of innovation which we are seeing, and we are very glad to be part of that ecosystem right now. And I'll be happy to elaborate more on that, but it's basically having your last mile execution system which really orchestrates all these stakeholders, dark stores, warehouses, hubs, customers, riders, transporters, 3PLs, and really bring all of them together and orchestrate it in a way which still meets those massive, end consumer expectations that consumers have today.
So I guess it's not just last mile, but also first mile as well, yeah? And all the bits in between. Brett, what about yourselves in the intralogistics space? What's the latest and greatest that we have coming from SSI?
Yeah, I think in this space it's constantly evolving. That's the thing. So customer expectations are constantly changing. I agree with you completely. I was talking to a customer even just last week, and we're trying to do a design level for their particular solution. And We can do everything they need us to do, except for a couple of little things. They want to have an order cut-off time of 3 p.m, and they want to have everything dispatched by 4 p.m, which is a real challenge. So I've got to build the system 3 times bigger than what I actually need it to be for the rest of the day. And having that conversation with the customer and them having to change their mindset, because they've traditionally done this, and it's pure e-com business, by the way. They've traditionally done this 100% manually. It's a tough conversation, because they say, well, hang on, I'm automating, and why can't I do this? Why, I can do it with people. Yeah, you can do it with people, but you've got 150 people doing it, you know, and you've only got them doing it for 4 hours of the day, whereas for the rest of the day, you've only got 20 people doing it. It's flexible. People are flexible as long as you can get them. So automation and trying to get that sweet spot and make it work for customers in e-com is a very difficult thing to do, especially when you look at traditional e-com solutions. It takes a lot of infrastructure. It takes a lot of cost to build that infrastructure for a very small percentage of what you're trying to hit in your marketplace. So I think a pragmatic approach is really important. You really have to understand what's important for your customers and then really hit on those things. Because if you don't, you end up spending a lot of money that you don't necessarily need. I think that's the real challenge there.
Thanks, Brad. So, Vivian, I'm going to ask you this question. Yogi has gone through, from my limited experience, 2 or 3 iterations or reinventions. So, what is Yogi doing in this space? You know, in last mile e-commerce, or what innovation in e-commerce logistics is Yogi?
I think to reiterate what Malay said earlier as well, it's about the orchestration of everyone in this space, right? So what Yogi does is we provide connectivity between your 3PLs, your freight forwarders, your main freight providers, your first mile guys, your fulfillment centers, and communicate that to the very last person that will be taking the shipment and delivering it to the doorsteps of your customers, right? I think a lot of as of right now, a lot of the people that actually do the last leg of the work are left out of this equation. So they need to receive information on the shipment. What time is it expected? If there is a return management, if there is what you do when there's damage, and and information like that. So this is what we provide.
Okay, so the e-commerce space is huge. You've got white goods, you've got retail, you've got apparel, retail, grocery, and so on and so forth, or the pharmaceutical space. Brett, what innovations are you, or where are you seeing the most innovations happen, or the most focus from clients that you deal with? Where's the most demand coming from?
In terms of market, I would say it's fashion and apparel for e-com, 100%. You know, we have seen a lot in pharma, but it's not traditional e-com. It's a little different. It's still to bricks and mortar, predominantly with a little bit of e-com, but fashion and apparel is really where it's being driven at the moment. And that brings its own individual challenges, because, you know, I'm not sure what size my shoe is going to fit me, so I order the size I think I am, one down and one up. Then I have to return them. And that's a very interesting prospect for any business. How do you manage that sort of volume of returns effectively, efficiently, without losing money? And for 100% pure e-com companies that are dealing in fashion, it's a real issue. And quite often when I go and walk through some of these warehouses and distribution centres, I see more people in the return section than I do in the picking area.
So in the fashion apparel industry, what about yourself, Malay? Where do you see the most demand?
So I would second what Greg just said on the apparel retail, but I'll add one more category as well. But on the apparel retail, let me just share an example. We work with one of the largest Japanese apparel retailers, and they have beautiful stores. You know, amazing amount of in-store experience for the consumers. It is you know, AR, VR led, you know, mirrors, you know, all sorts of technologies. I mean, kiosks, you name it, right? Almost no checkout counters. But the challenge is that they are getting a premium because of that premium consumer experience. And now when you are getting those goods delivered at home, how can you potentially outsource that to a 3PL, and expect the same amount of experience that the consumers can get in store? I mean, not the same amount, but at least a similar amount of premium experience or a white glove experience they can get, in the delivery part, right? So and so they had to rethink the whole delivery experience in a very different way, right from the convenience factor that we talked about, the slots, the time availability, but also having a very different set of delivery team and delivery partners available who can even chat with the consumers, right, in terms of what their experience has been, what normal size do they use, etc. So in some sense, you are looking at the delivery person not just as someone who is just dropping off the parcels, but someone who is almost equivalent to your store associate. And so you have to redesign the whole experience from that perspective. But I would like to add one more category, which is where there is a lot of challenge in innovation, which is the whole fresh category. So whether it is grocery, whether it is meat delivery, seafood, and then that's where it's perishable. I mean, timing is very critical. The margins are extremely low. It's far lower even than the apparel retail. Traditionally organizations have operated anywhere between 2% all the way up to 8%, 9% margins. And the cost of delivery there, especially if it's a missed delivery or if you're not optimizing on your delivery, it could really hurt your margins. So that's where there is a lot of innovation, things like integrating the sensors so that you are able to track the freshness. You are able to manage it within a certain timelines. You are able to look at all the real world problems out there in terms of managing route restrictions, optimizing. For all the real world challenges like in emerging countries like Indonesia and India, address quality is a big problem. So how do you ensure that you are delivering to the right address? So geocoding is another thing which comes into picture. But it's basically these are the two categories, apparel and groceries, where I would say or fresh as a broader category is where the most innovation is happening.
So to the participants, you are encouraged to ask questions. I think we've been talking for the last few minutes, and you can see from the responses that we've gotten from the panelists, they are actually quite experienced in this space, around e-commerce logistics, be it intralogistics or in the last or first mile, and the bits in between. So do we have any questions that we would like to ask this panel? I see the room being a bit subdued. Yes, Stephanie?
Yes, I had a question. A lot of the conversation has been around the retail space. Are you seeing a D2C, a direct-to-consumer shift happening, and is there any experimentation that you're seeing in this area?
Vivian?
So that was what I was going to mention as well, right? I think in 2008 when I was a LSP for Hewlett Packard, right, they have what they call the channel order and the online order, and the online order is basically quite small and small. Let's not use the word pathetic, but I think fast forward 14 years, right? It's become a very big part that a lot of these traditional companies are focusing on. Instead of selling into your challenger, selling into your cold storage and whatnot, they are looking at doing a direct out of their warehouse, and that's the value that I think Yogi is trying to add as well. Like, let's say you're in a standard 3PL warehouse, right? It used to be 90% channel order, 10% online order, but right now it's probably 50-50. It's still and what Yogi wants to do is also enable these 3PLs to do the last mile in B2C into residential areas delivery as well, by connecting them with their 2PL partners, especially in Southeast Asia or the ASEAN region. I think till this day, I think we had that discussion earlier as well, that ASEAN is one of the most challenging places to do e-commerce, simply because of addressing. Even in Thailand, they give you a highway marker, and it's like 1 kilometer range, and you have to figure out who you're supposed to deliver to within that 1 kilometer range. So, yep.
So that's perhaps a good segue. I saw a couple of hands raised. I will come back to you, but that's probably a good segue into a question I want to ask. The differences that you see in emerging markets versus developed markets, right? Singapore is Asia for beginners. Everything's built up, small space. Maybe price is an issue, but you compare that to say Indonesia or the CLMV countries, it's totally different. So, what do you see? What other differences do you see aside from the addressing issue in emerging markets versus developed markets? Malay?
Yeah. You are absolutely right. As I mentioned, the example that I took earlier of a Japanese retail company is clearly an example of a developed market example. But when it comes to emerging market, let me share a couple of examples, right? So one comes to my mind is, we worked with one of the CDIT retailers, and they are into, the CDIT is consumer durables and IT, so they deliver all the white goods appliances like washing machines, refrigerators, large box items. So if you really look at some of the emerging markets, the homes are not very large. They are typically condominiums of 1,000 square feet up to 2,000 square feet in size. And so when they go to deliver those goods, they are also they are also doing repurchase of the old items as well. And traditionally, they will not have space to store and keep the other item in their homes to be picked up later, because typically the forward logistics will be separate and the reverse logistics will be very separate, right? So you have to again solve for that very specific problem, because let's say if you were to pick up the old or the repurchased item back from the customer, how do you stack it, store it? So you have to also optimize for the space and ensure that you are also doing a proper route planning as well. So again, that has to be solved from a technology perspective. It's a mathematically slightly complex problem, but you have to take into account the space and the routes and the dynamism in terms of what kind of size of equipment you will get versus what you're delivering as well, and take that into account in terms of your planning. But this is one example, but traditionally, especially just one additional point I would like to highlight is there's a lot of challenge on the address quality in general, which I touched upon earlier, especially in emerging markets, and that again needs to be solved from a lot of AI and ML perspective in terms of really converting the bad quality addresses and structured addresses into a right latitude and longitude, for you to be able to plan your deliveries and shipments and routing for that.
And things that some of us take for granted. But the reverse logistics space is actually very interesting as well. I saw a question. Yes? Gentleman with the mask.
Hi everyone. Good morning, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to build on that question actually, because the markets are fairly different. And then there's this new trend in the cities especially of quick commerce, whereby there's an expectation of within a few hours. And we've seen it for food, for example. So for high value items, what is the different cities that are actually embracing it? For example, in Singapore, I think it's very difficult. But places like Indonesia, like Jakarta, or India cities, that seems to be becoming more and more prevalent. Can you give me a bit of a texture? Which cities seem to be moving towards quick commerce, or possibly moving there? And which ones do you think is going to be really difficult? Thanks.
I can share my experience, and maybe Vivian and Brett, you can add to that as well. But we are seeing really, some of the larger cities like Jakarta, clearly a very large city which is setting up, a lot of dark stores to be able to fulfill, to meet the needs of quick commerce. Obviously, major tier 2, tier 1, tier 2 cities in India, clearly we are seeing this. We are seeing even this trend in places like Karachi, in Lahore, for example, in Pakistan. We are seeing this across, a lot of Middle East Asian countries. So whether it is Dubai, or whether it is Jeddah, or for that matter, even in Baghdad, for example, you won't believe we work with a customer in Iraq, where the quick commerce and rapid delivery is clearly a thing which is coming up quite significantly. So we are seeing this across metropolitan city is clearly the norm, but we are seeing this pick up across multiple cities that we operate in.
So strictly an opinion, but and you've mentioned quite a few cities and a huge geography, right? The Middle East as well as Asia. What about maybe if you help to narrow that down to maybe industry and country, or location or city, you know?
So if I were to look at the countries, clearly Indonesia, Philippines, and in that order, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, clearly are top three markets in Southeast Asia, maybe followed by Malaysia, Vietnam. And if I were to really look at Middle East, again UAE and Saudi Arabia is probably massive, and UAE followed by that, and Egypt, for example, has been a very surprising market as well for us in terms of growth. We are seeing a lot of B2B e-commerce in places like Pakistan, for example. And B2B, by the way, is becoming a norm across multiple Southeast Asian countries, but Pakistan also stands out in that. And India has been obviously a very, very large market. We are not focused on China, so unfortunately I'm not able to comment on China. But clearly in Southeast Asia, these are the large countries that we see.
But maybe Vivian, question for you. We're talking about fast commerce, right, or express last mile. Does it really work? Is it something that we've got test cases out there? And when I say work, is it something that actually makes a profit? And that's maybe a path that we want to go down. Yeah. What are the challenges with e-commerce? Unless you have your banks or your investors investing in your profitability or for you to gain market share, you aren't really a business that stands up on its own. You talk about Grab, for example. How many $100 million or $1 billion did they lose? It's quite mind-boggling, right? And they continue to lose. So does it really work? What's your opinion?
Very controversial question. We're going to drag quite a few people through the mud here. I think at the panels from yesterday, right, we've mentioned that consumers have become brands, right? They want it here, want it now. Do you really need it now? No, I just want it here. I want it now, right? Is it for everyone in the e-commerce space, right? In the e-commerce space that is providing some sort of service. We're talking about package consolidation, the integrators, the fulfillment centers, the FedExes and UPSs, even down to the guy that delivers to the home address, right? Has it been sustainable for them? I think before COVID, it's a public news, it's a news article. FedEx and UPS actually said no to Amazon. They're like, no, the rates you're paying are so horrible. Every package that I pick up from you, I'm losing money. Why am I doing the work and not being paid, well, for the work that I've done, right? So I think e-commerce has always been controversial from the commercial sustainability of it. I think there are quite a few guys that are platforms for e-commerce. I think we're still fine. But for the people that are actually doing the work, I think in the last couple of months, diesel has gone from $1 to $3, right? That has been a very critical cost increase for a lot of the drivers that are doing the work. And we've been receiving feedback that a lot of the fuel surcharge mechanism has not been accepted by their customers as well. So how do we be more sustainable, right? How do we educate the end customers that there is a price to pay, right? I know that you don't see the services and how it gets to you, but there are so many people touching your one parcel, and you would pay $99 for a pair of jeans from the US, but you refuse to pay unless it's free shipping, you will not purchase it. So I think that has always been my personal opinion, and it's a bit controversial. But yeah.
Yeah, I just did a quick check. I'm sure many of you know this, but the exact number is Singaporean Grab marked a net loss of over $1 billion for the fourth quarter of 2021. $1 billion. right? So what's going to change? Brett, I'll start with you. You know, let's make it a bit interesting here. Where are we going with this? Because it's just not sustainable, right? But companies still seem to want to do this. Of course, the consumers are driving this demand. So where do you think this is going?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think the landscape in Australia, and I'll keep it fairly centric to the market that I'm most familiar with, I suppose, to be safe. In Australia, the consumer's expectation is nowhere near as great as what it is in this part of the world. I think that's the first thing I need to say. You know, if we get promised next day delivery and it gets delivered the next day, you're over the moon. The reality is it won't get delivered the next day, it'll get delivered the day after that or the day after that. And that's just the way that it goes, you know, and with COVID and the advent of all of the challenges in the whole supply chain, including last mile deliveries, you have to expect that sort of flexibility. So where will it end up going? I think the Australian market will mature. It will ask for more, I suppose, frequent deliveries, that, you know, quick commerce that we were talking about, but I think it's a while off yet.
But are they going to pay for it? So you just said that.
That's very interesting. Are they going to pay for it? And I agree with Vivian. You know, as a consumer myself, of course, as everybody else is in this room, if you have to pay for shipping, it's a real sort of, oh really? Surely I can find that somewhere where I don't have to pay for shipping. It's just the way that it is. It's competition, isn't it? And competition drives these sorts of innovations and customer expectations. So as long as somebody's willing to do it and it's free shipping, somebody's going to look for it.
Thanks, Brett. Do we have any other questions? We have a question from the back of the room. Where's the microphone? Microphone?
Yeah.
Yes. Supply chain issues.
Can I just add one thing really quickly as well? I think this is about innovation in e-commerce logistics, right? I think to be innovative, you need budget to be innovative. And if the business is not commercially sustainable, how do we find the budget to continuously be innovative?
Come up with a nice pitch, go out there and get more investment. Yes, we have a question.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Sami. I'm working for Decathlon. And the profitability topic is really interesting. In 2021, Decathlon was doing 20% of the sales through e-commerce. It has decreased because I think we are in an industry where people need to see the product, to discuss with the people in the store to understand the product. There are other industries where probably the trend is that it's going to increase. You have said that Lazada today is not being able to be profitable. It's a pure player. Amazon probably on the pure e-commerce activity they're losing money as well because we know the income is coming from the web services. So imagine for a company like us that needs to invest, if the pure player are not even profitable, I do believe that today we are probably not profitable as well on the e-commerce sectors. So my concern is, where are we going? I mean, are we going to be in a point where if there is no more mortgage and brick activity, the new players, they will have to go into those marketplace without any other choice than basically give the products to those big players? Is it the future of the e-commerce, having those 2 or 3 big players like Amazon, Alibaba, JD.com that are making the money not from the e-commerce activity but the other one? And I mean, if it's this kind of future, I believe it's a bit sad. So what do you think? Do you think there are some players that are going to maybe remove their product from this marketplace? We have seen Nike, for example, that have just removed some of their product for those marketplace. What's the future according to you, based on the fact that the consumer still wants to have their products at home, if possible, within 24 hours?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think, you know, how do we, I mean, the question, if I were to rephrase it, what we are seeing is, what's the future of e-commerce, right? I mean, is it going down the same path, or is it looking bleak, or is there an optimism? I think the way I would answer it is, you know, one is from, you know, the market forces perspective. I mean, market forces obviously, you know, drive the behavior change. And as we know today, I mean, you know, there's the equity markets have corrected a lot, e-commerce valuations have corrected, technology valuations have corrected. So I think in some sense it will certainly have an impact in terms of the players who can sustain and who cannot. But to your point, I think what organizations, at least the e-commerce organizations, are really trying to do is basically get consumers addicted, right? I mean, if I were to put it in a maybe a slightly maybe a negative tone to it, but they want consumers to get addicted to the services, to the products which you're buying, and hope that they will be able to be able to monetize at some point in time, and not as a switch, but as a gradual change which you may not even realize, right? So if you were to really look at let's say the Grab prices or the Uber prices, there were tons of driver incentive being paid to get more drivers on board. Those got taken out. Amazon Prime subscription, while Amazon may still maybe not be profitable on the e-commerce side, I mean the Prime subscription rates have been increasing year on year, right? And they are trying to move into a model where you basically subscribe and basically then you get all you can eat kind of services available for free, right? So that's the direction at least the organizations are trying to drive to. Obviously it requires lots of investments, as I mentioned, in infrastructure, in technology, in business processes, and which is what they are really investing. But the hope is that they grow through this, they compete with a lot of traditional organizations as well. And then being able to then gradually increase their pricing, or at least start charging some of the premium services, right? Like for example, if you want same day delivery, you pay extra premium as opposed to let's say next day delivery, and so on and so forth. So that's the thought process, and hoping the market forces kind of drive the right behavior as well.
And perhaps maybe a bit of commercial fortitude as well. The gentleman mentioned Nike. But even some logistics companies are saying, look, this is not a space I want to play in. Like FedEx or UPS saying to Amazon, we don't want to handle your deliveries for you, not for that price. We appreciate your business, but and I did the same thing to FedEx years ago when I used to run a logistics company. I said to them, thank you for your business, but I'd rather not have you as a customer. And they were shocked. This was 15 years ago. You're telling FedEx you don't want their business. So it's also that commercial fortitude, deciding what makes sense for your business, and taking that approach. Any other questions from the floor? We have one in the front. Yes. Giving this young man a good workout in the front here, Stephanie. Thank you.
Just the thought of this, like we're talking about e-commerce logistics. Does the model have to be delivery? You have Easy Buy, which is doing, car park, you see queues of people in front of trucks and car parks. Is there any experimentation other than just straight up delivery?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, a lot of what we're talking to customers about now is the click and collect model. People still do like to go into bricks and mortar stores, and I don't think that's ever going to change. When you're buying apparel or low value items, something that doesn't really matter, people are happy to just look on the website and click it and off they go and it gets delivered. But when you're talking about a higher level of investment, something that's a more longer term prospect, people still want to go and see it. So that click and collect experience is definitely something that we're seeing a lot more of. And something that we're seeing in our marketplace is that click and collect is free. And you can choose the store you want to click and collect it from, but if you want it within a few days, you can get it delivered for free. If you want it tomorrow, you have to pay the premium. But you could actually pick it up in the store, click and collect today as well if you wanted to. So that's quite an interesting prospect, I think.
So good segue to the last and final area perhaps we want to talk about before we wrap up. The sustainability angle. Vivian, you mentioned it a bit when we were talking earlier. What innovation can we do in this space? There's just not enough focus, in my opinion. The overpacked items, you get a small item in a big carton box with a lot of bubble pack. Do we need to ship that frequently? Pick up instead of door-to-door delivery? What innovations are you seeing or do you think we should be looking at? Vivian?
Innovations in e-commerce from the green space with regards to sustainability, right? I think we can definitely improve on packaging. I think a couple of guys are exploring more sustainable packaging. Another thing is the carbon emission, GHG Scope 3. Everyone in logistics has to eventually look into that. Counting your carbon emission and crediting it. I think there's quite a few initiatives in Singapore lately. I believe, I've spoken to someone at GoBell recently, and they're doing electric vehicle EV vans, basically. And I think the purchase is actually subsidized by the Singapore government. I think with diesel going from $1 to $3, a lot of people might start to sunset their old diesel van assets, and get into doing that. I think that is a more concrete way of exploring sustainability in the e-commerce space.
Malay, what are you seeing in this space?
I think very similar. Electrification clearly is a very large theme today. A lot of e-commerce organizations, whether it's even the 3PL specific express logistics companies in the 3PL space, whether it's their own captive fleet or whether it's their outsourced or contracted fleet, they're willing to pay even a higher premium or a higher price for delivery if basically there's an electric vehicle being used in delivery. So there's clearly an electrification trend which is happening on the last mile on the delivery side. But I think the bigger piece is just measuring that and measuring the impact, right, in terms of and basically customers, consumers, being clearly aware of either the negative impact or the savings that they're driving because of their behavior. I think is at least the first step in that direction, which is where IT could certainly help.
Thanks, Lee. So starting with you, Brett, 30 seconds. What innovation in e-commerce logistics should we be looking at for the next 12, 24 months from your perspective?
From my perspective, we've got to harmonise traditional bricks and mortar distribution centres to be able to accommodate e-commerce a lot more easily than what they currently do. There's some really good technology coming out in the marketplace, which is all fairly new. The challenge with e-commerce orders is their order profile. It's very different to a traditional store delivery order, so how do you deal with those small orders and small number of items per order? And I think the pouch sortation solutions that are on the market now, which is taking a whole new view of how we pick and sequence. I'm not going to use the word sort because they sequence, especially for apparel, is a very different opportunity and good for both store and e-commerce.
Thanks, Brett. Vivian, focus, next 12, 24 months.
I think two things, connectivity throughout the entire e-commerce logistics chain, right? Just with your partners, with people with the fulfillment center before you as a 3PL or as a delivery guy. Another thing will be being more green, reduction in packaging and just measurement of your greenhouse gases and being able to report that back to your customers. Because Scope 3 is uncontrollable, so you have to measure it and report back to your customers.
Thanks, Malay.
I would say two things. One is orchestrating and investing in this, part of the supply chain. There's still tons of, although we are talking 2022 and almost more than 2 decades of e-commerce being around us, there's still a lot of manual intervention, whether it's sequencing, sorting, dispatching, communication, delivery. So basically automating that part of the supply chain and investing into that part of the supply chain is one. And second is not forgetting, few of the stakeholders in the process who are, by the way, adopting digital technologies very rapidly. So whether those are, Warkuns or sari store owners or kirana store owners as they call them, or dark stores or the riders, right? And really enabling them to do their jobs better. I think those would be the two large themes over the next 12 months.
So, a pretty consistent message, and the harmonization of the brick and mortar space as they enter e-commerce, right? And the connectivity or the orchestration that still needs to take place. It's amazing. We talk about this at every LogiSYM. We talk about it every year. More visibility, more tools, etc., etc. And I believe we'll be talking about it again next year as well.